You breathe in deeply. The air tastes like salt and driftwood, and somewhere nearby, an old canoe creaks softly against the tide. The ocean is still, but not silent. You can hear the tiny slap of ripples against stone, the whisper of palm leaves brushing together above you. And far out beyond the reef, the low, patient roar of waves folding themselves into foam. It's night on a Polynesian island, maybe 1,000 years ago or maybe just yesterday, if you count history the way the ocean does. Stars crowd the sky like spilled grain, and the world feels wider than your lungs can hold. There's no electricity, no clocks, no app notifications. Only the slow pull of the moon and the sound of your own breathing. Someone's nudging you awake. You're about to set sail. A wiry old navigator, his hair the color of sun-bleached rope, hands you a paddle without explaining anything, because why would he? You're the newcomer here. He just says, softly, look up. Above you, the sky stretches forever, more map than mystery. You see stars you've never seen before, points of light, so sharp they could cut glass. The navigator tells you, almost lazily, that these are host stars guiding stars. He gestures toward a cluster near the horizon and mutters something about Te Punga, the Southern Cross, his voice smooth and low, like he's half asleep himself. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, if you follow those and survive the night, we'll get where we're going. You probably won't make it through this day. But for now, the canoe rocks gently beneath you, steady as a cradle. The elders here believe the ocean is alive not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally. It breathes, it talks, it remembers. When you sit still long enough, your legs dangling in the cool, black water, you can almost believe it. The navigator dips his hand into the sea, scoops up a little water, and lets it drip through his fingers. He watches how the droplets fall and murmurs something about currents, tides, and talking waves. Here's a fact that feels too beautiful to be practical. Polynesian navigators once read entire journeys in the clouds. Certain cloud shapes, they say, give away islands hundreds of miles away. White, flat-bottomed clouds mean there's land beneath, because moisture rises from forests and lagoons. Puffy, towering clouds. Those are just oceanic drama queens, showing off without meaning anything. Historians still debate whether some navigators really spotted islands this way, or if it is the kind of knowledge you pretend to have until it works once and people start calling you a genius. As the canoe pushes away from the sand, the sounds of the island fade. The cicadas, the quiet chatter, the faint laugh of a child. Ahead, there's only the hush of dark water and the occasional soft splash of a paddle. The old man hums under his breath, a tune that might be centuries old or something he made up an hour ago. It doesn't matter. It keeps time with the waves. Every few minutes, he taps your shoulder and points at something, a star here, a low cloud there, the faint ripple of current below the surface. He never explains fully, but you start to notice patterns anyway. The ocean stops being blank and starts whispering hints. Somewhere above you, a shooting star burns across the sky and dies without ceremony. You think about your phone back home, full of maps that don't smell like salt or sound like waves. Out here, you wonder if maybe all your apps would get seasick. The air grows warmer, softer, thicker, with the scent of night-blooming flowers drifting from the unseen islands behind you. The canoe glides onward, cutting a gentle seam between starlight and reflection. Before we drift too far, take a moment to breathe. If you're new here, gently like and subscribe. It helps more sleepy travelers find us. And if you're awake enough, leave a quiet little comment below with where you're rewatching from and what time it is there. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. Deeper into the dark ocean where the sky begins to fold into the waves. You wake if you were ever asleep at all to a soft slap of salt water against your cheek. The canoe rocks lazily, half adrift, and the stars above are beginning to thin into a pale lavender pre-dawn. Your legs are cramped, your back aches, and somehow you're weirdly at peace about it. The old navigator, still humming, leans over the side and stares into the sea as if it's speaking directly to him. After a long silence, he mutters, "The swell is coming from the northeast." You nod, pretending to understand, because that's easier than admitting you're just now learning swells exist. For navigators, the ocean is less like water and more like braille patterns you feel instead of read. They believe the long, rolling swells remember where they've been. A single pulse can travel hundreds of miles, carrying with it the faintest ghost of distant winds and storms. The navigator says he can tell, just by feeling the canoes rise and fall, whether an island hides beyond the horizon. You wonder, briefly, if this makes him some sort of human Wi-Fi, except, better reception. Far ahead, a faint smear of clouds catches the new sunlight, and you see his eyes sharpen. "Land," he whispers. You squint, but there's nothing there, just more empty ocean. He explains patiently, this time that the clouds above islands hold themselves differently, as though anchored by the forests below. You try to see it. You fail. But you nod anyway. Here's your obscure tidbit for the night. Some Polynesian. Navigators believed that birds were hired messengers of the ocean itself. When land was near, they'd watch for noddies and frigate birds at dusk. Noddies fly back to roost at night. Frigate birds don't. Spotting the wrong bird in the wrong direction could add several extra days to your journey, which is just the ancient version of taking the wrong highway exit and pretending you meant to. The navigator doesn't watch birds tonight. He watches you, actually, studying your hands gripping the paddle. He adjusts your grip wordlessly and points again at the stars you thought you'd already memorized. Turns out you didn't. He traces an invisible line from one constellation to another, mapping an entire voyage you can't quite comprehend yet. You're not sure if he's being mystical or sarcastic when he mutters, "People who need maps get lost faster." By now, the eastern horizon has begun bleeding gold and pink into the edges of the sky. The first warmth of sunlight touches your face, and you realize how far from the island you are. No shoreline behind you. No anchors to cling to. Just ocean, infinite and slow, moving beneath a sky so wide it almost swallows you whole. Historians, for what it's worth, still don't fully understand how Polynesians discovered and settled thousands of islands without compasses, sextants, or GPS. Some argue they drifted accidentally on strong currents. Others believe they executed precise, deliberate journeys spanning thousands of miles. Either way, here you are, in the middle of that uncertainty, riding on faith, clouds, and muscle memory older than written language. The old man lets out a sharp laugh, for no reason at all. "The sea hides nothing," he says, almost teasingly. Then he splashes his hand into the water, cupping a little up to show you how the light dances in it. Tiny sparks flicker in the shadows, bioluminescent plankton glowing faintly in the gentle stir. You stare, entranced. He yawns, unimpressed. Apparently, he's seen entire oceans glow before and thinks you're being dramatic. Somewhere, behind you, a faint bird call carries across the water just one high, quick note. The navigator tilts his head and grins without looking back. 3 hours, he says. Landfall by then. You can't see it, but the clouds are shifting again, gathering their soft secrets above the hidden island. The canoe drifts steadily, your paddle dipping and rising, each stroke as slow as your breath. The ocean exhales, you exhale with it. And as the sun climbs lazily into the morning, the waves soften to a steady, rocking lull. Like the world itself has decided to keep you balanced. The sun is higher now, leaning lazily into its late morning stride. The ocean has changed color beneath you. It's no longer the dark, endless black from last night, but a shifting quilt of blues. Deep indigo, in the distance pale turquoise close to the canoe, and streaks of silver where sunlight touches the rolling crests. You think, for a fleeting second, that it looks like polished glass. The navigator chuckles at you softly, like he knows exactly what you're thinking, and mutters, "Glass breaks, ocean doesn't." You let that sink in for a moment, while the canoe glides forward with the soft rhythm of paddles against water. A seabird cries somewhere far off to notes. Sharp and clean-and, the old man turns his head slightly, listening the way someone listens for a forgotten name in a crowded room. He doesn't explain, and you don't ask. The island isn't in sight yet, but the navigator knows it's close. He closes his eyes, face tilted toward the wind, and breathes in deeply, like he's drinking the air itself. Then he says something so casually it nearly slips past you. There are pandanus trees ahead. You look at him, baffled. He smiles at your confusion, and finally, explains just a little. When islands are near, the wind carries faint, invisible scents of flowers, fruit, and leaves across the ocean. Some navigators train their senses so well they can name the plants by smell alone. You inhale deeply, trying to copy him, and all you get is salty, wet everything. He grins wider, and for a moment, you think you catch the faintest sweetness of something distant. Here's your big historical fact for today. Polynesian navigators crossed distances of over 2,000 miles without compasses. Sextants, or written maps long before Europeans discovered the Pacific. They relied on stars, winds, clouds, swells, birds, and sometimes just sheer, quiet faith. Scholars are still baffled by how consistently accurate they were. Some suggest memorized star charts. Others argue they carried ancestral chants holding entire navigational routes in song. No one fully agrees, which, if you think about it, is very on brand for historians. Speaking of chants, the old navigator starts humming again. It's slower this time, softer, more like a lullaby than a song. You realize it's a counting rhythm, and each note matches the dip of his paddle. You try to copy him quietly, awkwardly, but your timing is off. He sighs without looking at you, mutters something about city hands, and keeps paddling like the ocean belongs to him personally. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some navigators believed certain fish carried secrets about the deep. If you spotted flying fish at dawn, for example, that meant you were near an atoll. If you saw tuna chasing baitfish, land was still far away. Supposedly, you could also predict islands by the color of the water, which is fine if you know 27 shades of blue by heart. If you don't, well, good luck. By midday, the heat is sticky and soft, draping across your shoulders like a damp blanket you didn't ask for. The canoe's wooden frame creaks faintly, tired but steady. You close your eyes, feeling the sun paint warmth onto your skin, and listen, the soft hiss of paddles, the whisper of breeze through hair. And somewhere below, the muffled echo of your own heartbeat mixing with the sound of water slapping the hull. You wonder briefly how many days this would take in a modern boat with GPS and a cheerful robotic voice, telling you to turn left at the next reef. You decide instantly that this is better even if you're also pretty sure you're slightly sunburned already. Then, all at once, the navigator raises a hand. Silence. He points toward the horizon, where the clouds hang lower and heavier than anywhere else. At first, it looks like nothing, a smudge on the edge of sight, almost not worth noticing. But the longer you stare, the more certain you become. There is something out there, maybe land, maybe nothing. You want to ask, but he speaks first, softly, 2 hours. His voice is calm, patient, certain. It settles in you like a weight, grounding you against the restless, endless motion of the sea. And then the canoe keeps gliding forward, steady as breath, until the horizon begins to fold itself open. By the time you notice the birds, the ocean has already told the navigator everything he needs to know. He squints into the glare and murmurs something about "Manu okay." The white ferry turns, circling high overhead. You watch them dip and turn in lazy spirals, never touching the water, and he nods like they've just confirmed his suspicions. "Land is near," he says, almost lazily, like he's talking about the weather instead of where your entire journey ends. The air smells different now, less salt, more green. It's so subtle you might have missed it if you weren't trying, but once you notice, it feels unmistakable, like crushed leaves after rain, faint and soft, riding just above the ocean breeze. You inhale deeply, slower this time, and when you glance at the navigator, you catch the barest hint of pride on his face. You smelled it too. Historians still debate whether early Polynesian explorers first set out on purpose or by accident, blown into unknown waters by storms. Some say these voyages were carefully planned, relying on vast networks of knowledge passed down orally for generations. Others insist it started as chance-an unlucky fishing trip, a drifting canoe, a decision to keep going when there was no way back. The navigator, of course, doesn't care about that debate. He just dips his paddle and keeps moving forward, humming under his breath. Here's your cultural tidbit for this stretch of water on some islands. Navigators believed they could hear land before they saw it. Supposedly, the crash of waves against distant reefs carries differently on the wind, and experienced sailors swore they could distinguish the sound of an island-s surf long before sight confirmed it. You try listening now, closing your eyes. At first, all you hear is the rhythmic slap of water against the canoe butt. Then, beneath it, a faint, steady roar. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe not. A cloud bank stretches ahead, low and wide, like a soft veil hanging over the horizon. The navigator points to its flat underside and says, simply, "Lagoon." You ask how he knows, and he replies, "Clouds tell you everything. You just don't listen yet." You want to argue, but instead, You lean back slightly and watch the shapes shifting above you. Some clouds are thin and fast, racing like restless travelers. Others are solid, anchored somehow, holding steady over unseen land. For the first time, you start to understand just barely that there is a language here you've been ignoring all your life. The canoe slows as the swells change beneath you, rolling shorter and sharper, bouncing lightly beneath your knees. The navigator explains, almost absent-mindedly, that shallow water refracts the waves differently. You glance down, and sure enough, the deep indigo has softened into pale turquoise again, hinting at coral below. He finally smiles not much, just a small private curve of his mouth and says, "Welcome." Ahead, the island is still hidden behind the curve of the sea, but you feel it now. It's in the air, the water, the sky. Every detail, the birds, the clouds, the warmth of the wind has been slowly pulling you here, without you realizing. You glance behind at the endless stretch of ocean, where the island you left has already melted into memory. The canoe rocks softly, cradled between two worlds, the one you've known and the one you read drifting toward. The navigator dips his paddle again, calm and deliberate. He whispers something low and rhythmic, a chant you don't recognize. You decide not to ask what it means. Instead, you close your eyes and let the canoe carry you forward, steady, quiet, inevitable. You wake, or maybe you were never fully asleep to the sound of water changing its voice. It's softer now, almost shy, like the ocean is whispering secrets to the canoe. You lift your head and see it, the first hazy edge of land rising from the horizon, blurred by heat and light. The navigator doesn't announce it, doesn't point dramatically or shout land ho. He just blinks slowly, nods once, and resumes his humming. You suspect he's been aware of the island for hours, maybe even since yesterday, and simply didn't feel like telling you. It looks small from here, but the closer you drift, the more it unfurls itself, revealing dense green slopes rising gently from pale golden sand. A reef circles the island like an embroidered hem, the water inside almost glassy compared to the restless blue beyond. You try to imagine what this must have felt like 1,000 years ago, the first sight of land after weeks at sea, when you weren't entirely sure there was anything ahead of you at all. Historians debate endlessly whether these ancient voyagers were brave or reckless, but that feels like asking whether breathing is brave when the alternative is drowning. And here's your historical fact for this stretch of time, long before modern charts existed. Polynesian navigators mapped the Pacific using stick charts, delicate frameworks made from thin strips of wood lashed together with tiny shells, marking islands and curved lines representing swells. Some were small enough to hold in one hand. Others were enormous, spanning entire tables. None of them were carried on the voyage itself. You memorized them first, then left them behind. The navigator, of course, carries no such map. His is written in memory, wind, and muscle, the kind of knowledge your GPS app will never have, no matter how many satellites it borrows. By now, the air feels heavier and sweeter, like stepping into a warm greenhouse. You breathe in faint notes of pandanus and breadfruit, earthy and lush. It is strange how quickly the ocean's emptiness melts away when land finally comes into view. As you glide closer, you notice birds diving just offshore, plunging into shallow water before popping back up with small flashes of silver in their beaks. The navigator watches them closely and mutters the name of each species under his breath. There's a quiet satisfaction in it, like he's ticking items off a checklist only he can see. Your obscure tidbit for today: on some islands, chiefs carried bird lists in their oral traditions, reciting the nesting habits of dozens of species by memory. The lists weren't just ecological trivia, they were navigational tools. Reminders of where to expect certain birds depending on season, migration, and feeding patterns. A misplaced bird meant something was wrong with the sea, the weather, or maybe even you. A sudden gust ruffles your hair, warm and soft, smelling faintly of smoke. Someone on the island is cooking already. Your stomach growls, loudly enough for the navigator to glance at you with mild disapproval, as though hunger were an optional distraction. The canoe rocks gently as you near the reef. You can hear the surf now pounding steadily against the coral, and for the first time since leaving shore, the endless rhythm of paddling pauses. The navigator leans forward, watching the water carefully, tracing a narrow channel where the waves break less violently. "Stay low," he says, voice quiet but firm. The canoe edges into the channel, sliding between white walls of foam on either side. Spray mists your face, cool and clean, and you taste salt on your lips as the reef slips past, beneath you an entire forest of coral and fish flashing just below the surface, as if the sea itself had been hiding an aquarium this whole time. And then, just like that, the lagoon opens around you. Calm, glassy, impossibly blue. For a moment, there's silence except for the dripping paddles. Then, the navigator exhales slowly and says, "We're home." You don't step onto the island right away. Instead, the navigator drifts the canoe along the shoreline, hugging the curve of the lagoon. It's not ceremony, exactly its habit. Ritual, a chance to read the place before landing. You trail your fingers in the water as the canoe glides past coconut palms, leaning lazily over the sand. The breeze carries hints of wood smoke and roasted taro, so faint you wonder if you imagined them. Somewhere, inland, you hear a rooster crowing indignantly, as if you've arrived several hours late to an appointment it's set for dawn. The navigator murmurs directions you don't understand. Glancing at landmarks hidden to you, a leaning tree, a rock split by lightning. The way one ridge slopes differently than the rest. To you, it's just an island. To him, it's a living archive, every hill and inlet carrying centuries of memory. Here est today es historical fact. Polynesian settlements across the Pacific share astonishingly similar structures despite being separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Meeting houses, cooking pits, canoe sheds, even the alignment of ceremonial sites often follow comparable patterns. Scholars debate whether this was deliberate a conscious effort to keep culture uniform or if it is simply the efficiency of shared ancestry unfolding naturally. No one agrees, of course. You're starting to notice that historians rarely do. The canoe finally noses onto soft sand, the bow crunching lightly against shore. You hesitate, feeling the moment stretch, then step down into shallow water. It's warmer than you expected, lapping softly at your ankles as grains of pale gold sift between your toes. For the first time in days, the ground doesn't sway beneath you. You stand still, letting your body relearn balance, breathing in air heavy with green life. The navigator doesn't wait. He lifts his paddle, rests it across his shoulder, and walks inland without looking back. as though he knows you'll follow. You do. The island greets you quietly. Insects buzzing lazily, leaves rustling overhead, the occasional crash of distant surf. The path twists between towering breadfruit trees, their wide leaves fanning above you like slow-moving clouds. A few fallen fruits lie split open on the ground, their sweet, yeasty scent mixing with damp earth. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some islands believed breadfruit had spiritual guardians small, unseen spirits who protected each tree. If a harvest failed, it was said the guardian had been offended. You wonder briefly if you should greet one, just in case, but the navigator is already far ahead, humming under his breath, unconcerned with spirits or etiquette. The trail opens suddenly onto a small clearing. At its center stands a low platform made of weathered stone, carved smooth by centuries of hands. The navigator stops, rests his paddle upright, and bows his head slightly. You mimic him awkwardly, unsure if this is reverence or just habit. This, he says softly, is where the chants live. He explains, reluctantly, that navigational knowledge is more than observation. It's memory carried in rhythm, the stars, the swells, the birds, the seasons, all encoded into songs passed from teacher to apprentice. The stone platform isn't sacred exactly. It's practical, a place where generations sat to practice chants until they became part of breath and bone. You sit on the edge of the platform, running your fingers over its smooth surface. You can almost feel the weight of time pressing into this place. The hundreds of voices that shaped journeys across an ocean larger than continents. The navigator doesn't sing, not yet. He just rests beside you, silent, listening to the wind in the trees. You don't ask questions. For once, you let the quiet stretch unbroken. The island hums softly around you, timeless and unbothered. You close your eyes, letting your heartbeat sink with the slow rhythm of waves beyond the trees. And you realize, faintly, that the journey hasn't ended at all. It's only paused here for breath. Afternoon drapes itself lazily over the island, soft and heavy, like a woven mat stretched across the sky. The air is thick now, fragrant with damp soil, green leaves, and something faintly sweet you can't quite name. Insects hum steadily somewhere, in the shadows, their tiny wings buzzing like distant electricity. The ocean is still audible in the distance, a soft hush-and-draw that feels more like breathing than sound. The navigator sits cross-legged on the platform, his paddle resting beside him, eyes half closed. You think he might be asleep until he speaks suddenly. Voice quiet, but certain. You must learn the stars before you sleep tonight. You hesitate, unsure if he's serious. He opens one eye, catches your expression, and adds, or else the ocean will send you back to where you started. You're not sure if he's joking. He doesn't clarify. He gestures toward the sky still bright, still daytime but, insists you start now. He traces invisible arcs with his hand, naming constellations that won't appear for hours yet. You nod like you understand, though your memory already feels overloaded with bird lists, cloud shapes, wave angles, and now secret star maps that haven't even risen. Here's your historical fact for this section. Polynesian navigators memorized entire night skies. Not just single constellations, but shifting relationships between dozens of them, season by season, hour by hour. The rising and setting points of these stars were known so precisely that missing one by a single finger width of sky could mean sailing hundreds of miles off course. Think of it as an ancient GPS with no recalculating. Feature a no-friendly robotic voice telling you to make a U-turn when possible. The navigator taps the stone platform and tells you to listen. Not to him, but to the silence. Memory, he says softly, is the sound you make when you breathe between chants. You try, sitting very still, but the buzzing of insects seems deafening now. The weight of humidity pressing against your ears. You wonder how he can filter all of this and hold on to what matters without collapsing into confusion. Your obscure tidbit, there's a Polynesian term, quo, meaning navigator priest. Becoming one wasn't just about memorizing, roots it was about transformation. Once trained, you weren't just a sailor anymore. You were a bridge between islands, between ancestors and descendants, between the known and the unknowable. You wonder if your navigator is Poe. You almost ask, but decide against it. The quiet here feels too delicate for questions. A thin breeze brushes past, cooling your neck, carrying with it a faint tongue of salt from the lagoon. Somewhere above the canopy, a bird shrieks once, sharp and short, then disappears into silence again. The navigator finally opens both eyes and stands. "We'll walk," he says simply. The path winds inland, now shaded by towering palms and thick breadfruit trees. The ground beneath your feet is soft, warm, and damp in patches where rain has recently passed. Sunlight filters through the leaves in speckled patterns, golden and shifting like spilled honey. He leads you to a ridge overlooking the ocean. From here, you see the lagoon curving like a wide, protective arm around the island. Beyond, the reef, the sea glitters with endless motion, the horizon blurring into pale blue haze. He says nothing for a while. You find you don't need him to. As you sit beside him, you realize this silence isn't emptiness, it's calibration. It's the navigator syncing himself with the rhythms of the island. As though each place carries its own frequency he has to match. You close your eyes and try, too, breathing slowly, letting the warm air fill your lungs. By the time you open them again, the sun has drifted lower, shadows stretching long and soft across the sand. The day isn't done yet. Not even close. Evening descends slowly, like a patient tide. The sky deepens from pale blue to bruised lavender, then melts into a dark velvet speckled with stars. The lagoon mirrors them perfectly, a second sky shimmering beneath your feet. The navigator returns to the stone platform just as the first constellations begin to rise. He gestures for you to sit, and this time there's no small talk, no explanations. He simply begins chanting. The sound is low at first, almost like a hum, each syllable drawn out until it blurs into the next. The rhythm builds slowly, steady as waves, and you realize the chant isn't just music, it's instruction. Each word encodes a direction, a distance, a landmark. These are maps you hear, not see. Here is your historical fact for tonight. Polynesian, chance warranty written down until much later. And for centuries, navigation depended on oral transmission alone. A chant could hold thousands of nautical miles worth of data wind patterns. Star positions, island names woven into a melody so familiar you could recall it in darkness, storms, or exhaustion. Miss a verse, though, and you risked losing not just your bearings but your life. The navigator pauses mid-chant and points to the eastern horizon, where a bright star is just lifting above the edge of the sea. That one, he says softly, is Huckle A, the star of joy. You watch it rise slowly, steady and confident, its pale light reflected perfectly in the lagoon below. He explains, almost reluctantly, that Huckle sits near the celestial equator, making it one of the most reliable guides for long-distance voyages. When it's overhead, you know you're close to the middle of the Pacific. He says it so casually, you almost miss the enormity of it that a single point of light has guided generations across thousands of miles of open ocean. Your obscure tidbit for this section: some navigators trained their apprentices by blindfolding them at sea, forcing them to feel the patterns of swells and memorize the sound of distant reefs. Knowledge wasn't just visual, it was tactile, auditory, intuitive. To truly see the ocean, you first had to stop looking. The chant resumes, lower and slower now, until it settles into something like a lullaby. The night air cools against your skin, carrying the faint, resinous scent of burning wood from somewhere inland. A palm frond rustles softly behind you, and a gecko clicks once, sharp and quick, before vanishing into the shadows. The stars crowd thicker above you, more than you've ever seen before. Without streetlights or cities to drown them, they look impossibly close, as though you could lean back and fall straight into their quiet gravity. The navigator ends the chant abruptly and looks at you for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he says, simply, "Tomorrow we test what you've learned." You consider telling him you've learned nothing that your head feels. Stuffed with fragments of stars and birds and invisible scents you can't quite grasp. Instead, you nod solemnly as though you're ready. The lagoon reflects the constellations so perfectly now that the canoe resting on its surface looks like it is floating in the middle of the universe itself. You breathe slowly, letting the weight of the day melt into the hum of insects and the steady hush of waves. Tomorrow feels distant. Tonight is endless. Dawn returns like a whisper, pale and hesitant at first, spreading soft streaks of coral and gold across the horizon. You wake to the sound of wooden paddles knocking lightly against each other somewhere down by the lagoon. The air is cool now, damp with salt, and faintly sweet with the smell of crushed pandanus leaves drying nearby. The navigator is already awake, naturally. He sits on the edge of the stone platform, legs crossed, tracing something in the sand with a stick. When you approach, you see it's not a random doodle but a mapper circular diagram dotted with little arcs. Symbols and cross-hatchings you don't recognize. This, he says without looking up, is where the ocean hides its roads. You lean closer, trying to make sense of it. It's not a map of land, not in the way you expect. It's a map of motion the way swells curve, the angles of prevailing winds, the invisible forces that push and pull a canoe even when the water looks still. It's like watching someone chart the breadth of the planet itself. Your historical fact here: Polynesian navigators use something called dial-up, imaginary lines on the open sea. Invisible paths formed by the intersection of multiple wave patterns. When two swells collided at certain angles, they created a subtle rhythm you could feel through the hull of the canoe. Experienced navigators memorized these invisible roads like highways. Miss the right one, and you could wander endlessly. The navigator hands you a shallow bowl of fresh coconut water, still cool from the night air. You sip it slowly, tasting salt on your lips, as though the ocean has left its fingerprints there. Then he stands abruptly and gestures toward the canoe resting at the edge of the lagoon. "We leave," he says simply. You pause halfway through the drink. "Leave where?" He doesn't answer, just pushes the canoe into the shallows. You follow him because, honestly, what else are you going to do? The canoe is small, carved from a single tree, smooth and pale beneath your fingertips. You step inside carefully, sitting low as the navigator pushes off with one strong shove. The lagoon water laps gently against the sides, warm and glassy under the morning sun. For a while, he says nothing, just steers with a paddle, his movements slow and precise. You try to match his rhythm, dipping your own paddle into the water, but he shakes his head and tells you, not yet. Apparently, there's a right time for everything, even paddling. As you drift farther from shore, the sound of the village fades until there is only the soft hiss of the lagoon beneath you and the steady creak of wood. The horizon stretches wide, and suddenly the island feels small behind you, like a green bead dropped into endless blue fabric. Your obscure tidbit today: some Polynesian navigators believed each island called to the canoe. It wasn't mystical so much as experiential, they swore that, if you knew how to listen, you could feel distant land through the way swells refracted, how birds flew, and even the taste of air carried on the wind. Science hasn't confirmed all of this, but you have to admit it sounds a lot more poetic than checking Google Maps. Halfway across the lagoon, the navigator tells you to close your eyes. You hesitate, thinking this is a trick, but he insists. "Feel," he says. "Don't look." You obey. At first, there's nothing. Just the heat of the sun on your shoulders and the faint slap of water against wood. But then slowly you start to notice it, the canoe shifting ever so slightly beneath you. Not rocking, but rolling like it's sliding along something unseen. That, he whispers, is the road. You keep your eyes shut a little longer, letting the rhythm of the water sink in. It feels fragile, like holding a secret between your palms. When you open them again, the island looks farther away than you expected. The navigator grins faintly, as though he enjoys your sudden ennies. "Don't worry," he says softly. "We're still close." You don't find that comforting at all. By midday, the canoe has cleared the lagoon and entered open ocean. The swell is deeper here, rolling beneath you in long, patient breaths. The horizon looks endless, stitched with thin silver ripples where sunlight glances off distant waves. The navigator sits at the stern, paddle resting across his knees, and closes his eyes as though listening to something you can't hear. "Tell me what you see," he says without looking at you. You glance around, scanning for landmarks, but there's nothing, just ocean, endless and unbroken. You admit this, feeling mildly defensive. "Wrong," he says flatly. "Look again." You frown, but do as you're told, focusing this time. Slowly, faintly, you notice it. The horizon isn't flat at all. Tiny ridges rise and fall far ahead, where distant swells collide and create subtle seams in the surface. The navigator nods when you point them out, satisfied. Here's your historical fact. Polynesian navigators read the sea like a living manuscript, discerning as many as 8 different wave patterns at once, each coming from a different storm hundreds of miles away. These weren't random. They were signatures, persistent and reliable, forming a vast and shifting network of clues. You think about your own life and how proud you were the first time you parallel parked without hitting a curb. Compared to this, you feel underqualified. The sun is high now, painting the ocean in sheets of gold and white. The heat soaks into your skin, sticky and relentless, until the navigator hands you a small bundle of pandanus leaves to shade your neck. You didn't even realize you were burning until you feel the relief. An albatross circles lazily overhead, its wingspan impossibly wide. The navigator watches it for a moment, then murmurs, "Good sign." You ask why, and he explains that birds like this rarely fly far from land. Follow them at the right hour, and they'll lead you straight to islands hidden beyond the horizon. You glance up again, hoping to read some secret direction in its path. But the albatross drifts away, indifferent to your desperation. Your obscure tidbit for today: there are records of ancient navigators training apprentices by deliberately taking them far offshore, blindfolding them and spinning the canoe around until they were disoriented. The task was simple: find the way home using nothing but swells, stars, and instinct. Historians still debate whether this was cruel genius or just cruel. The afternoon drags quietly, the silence broken only by the hush of waves and the occasional creak of the canoe's joints. You breathe slower now, matching the rhythm of the water without even meaning to. The navigator speaks once more, barely louder than the wind. "Tonight, you'll steer." You laugh before realizing he isn't joking. Suddenly, the endlessness of the ocean feels heavier, as though the horizon has leaned closer, watching. By the time the sun begins its slow descent, the heat has softened into a warm, forgiving glow. The canoe glides as though pulled by invisible threads, the water slipping past with a quiet persistence. You lean back against the curved edge, feeling the grain of the carved wood under your fingertips. The navigator squints at the horizon, lips moving faintly, as though reciting something to himself. A chant, maybe, or a list he doesn't want to forget. Finally, he says, "Tonight, you'll learn the sky." You think this sounds romantic until he points at the clouds and starts naming them like old friends. There's shredded coconut for the wispy cirrus high above, breadfruit belly for the fat cumulus lumping near the horizon, and something he calls canoe breaker, which you hope is just a poetic metaphor and not a real warning. Tonight's historical fact: Polynesian navigators tracked attack, or reference stars to guide them across thousands of miles of open ocean. Instead of thinking of the canoe as moving, they imagined the canoe as still, with islands, stars, and even the heavens passing by instead. It's an inversion of perspective, a little unsettling, but strangely beautiful. Like realizing the universe isn't revolving around you after all. The navigator hands you a polished piece of shell, its smooth surface carved with faint notches. It's a star compass, he explains, pointing out where certain notches align with specific constellations as they rise and set. You glance up, trying to match his explanation to the darkening sky. But here's the thing: there are a lot of stars. An alarming number of stars. The more you look, the more there are, spilling across the heavens like someone tipped a basket of glowing seeds. You squint, trying to focus, but the patterns keep slipping out of your grasp. Don't stare so hard, he advises calmly. They'll hide from you. You briefly consider whether this is profound advice or just an elaborate prank. The sun dips lower, and the island you left behind this morning is little more than a shadow now. The green slopes melting into blue distance. The ocean is no longer turquoise but ink dark, the surface reflecting streaks of rose and amber from the dying light. Suddenly, the navigator points sharply to the west. See that cloud? You nod, unsure what you're looking at. That one means land, he says firmly, even when you can't see it. Here's today's obscure tidbit. Certain low, flat islands are so small they vanish below the horizon, but their presence bends the movement of clouds above them. Ancient navigators learned to read these subtle distortions, identifying land before it appeared like nature's unspoken spoiler alert. Historians still debate whether this ability was purely observational or if it relied partly on subconscious pattern. Recognition we don't yet understand. The canoe rocks gently under you as the wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of salt and something vaguely floral. Somewhere behind you, a bird cries a single, high-pitched note that fades quickly into silence. The navigator murmurs something in a language you don't recognize, then leans back, resting his paddle across his knees. Tonight, he repeats, softer this time, you'll steer. You decide not to panic until at least after dinner, which, judging by the lack of food aboard, is probably not happening anyway. Night falls slowly, like ink seeping into cloth. The stars emerge one by one, then all at once, until the sky becomes a deep, glittering river stretched endlessly overhead. The canoe floats like a speck suspended between two infinities, sky above, sea below. The navigator sets a small bowl between you, filled with glowing embers cradling strips of dried coconut husk. The faint smoke curls upward, sharp and sweet, keeping away insects you didn't realize were following you until now. Watch, he says, and points to the east. A bright star has just risen, sharp and steady, more brilliant than the rest. Sirius, he whispers, though in his tongue the name sounds different, softer, rounder, almost like a lullaby. He explains how this star, and others like it, anchor your course. You keep it there, he says, gesturing over the curve of the canoe. When it moves, you move with it. Your historical fact tonight, the Polynesian star compass, wasn't he fixed to one or to guiding stars? It used dozens. Navigators memorized where hundreds of stars rose and set across the horizon, rotating seamlessly from one to the next as the night unfolded. It was an art of constant adjustment, a conversation between sky and sea. You dip your hand into the water, half expecting it to be cold, but it's warm, almost like skin. Tiny flashes of light spark beneath the surface bioluminescence, living stars caught under your fingertips. You swirl your hand slowly, and the glow trails behind like liquid fire. The navigator notices and smiles faintly. Good omen, he says. Your obscure tidbit tonight. On some voyages, navigators carried gourds filled with seawater, believing the patterns of tiny bubbles inside mirrored the swells outside. They'd study the way the bubbles shifted to confirm direction, basically an ancient analog compass, but wetter. The waves deepen as you push farther into the open ocean, but they're steady, rhythmic, like slow breathing. You can feel the pulse of the swell through the canoe itself, an undercurrent beneath the surface chop. The navigator teaches you how to sense its direction not by looking, but by feeling the subtle lift beneath your spine, your knees, your hands resting on the wood. It's hypnotic, this surrender to patterns older than language. After some time, he gestures for you to take the steering paddle. Your heart beats faster as you grip it, unsure what to do. "Keep Sirius where I showed you," he says simply. "Nothing else." "Easier said than done." The paddle feels heavier than it should, the ocean louder, the stars brighter. You breathe in slow, measured pulls, focusing on the rhythm of the swell beneath you. Sirius glows steady ahead, a small promise in the vastness. Minutes stretch into hours, though you barely notice. The world narrows into three things: the paddle in your hands, the star above, and the deep, patient breathing of the ocean beneath. You think, briefly, about how much easier this would be with GPS. Then you decide not to mention it. Behind you, the navigator hums a low, tuneless song. It blends with the hiss of waves, the sigh of wind, and the distant cries of unseen birds. Somewhere, in the middle of it all, you realize your shoulders have relaxed. Your breath has slowed. You're steering. The thought settles into you like warm sand between your fingers. By the time dawn stretches pale fingers across the horizon, you've almost forgotten you spent the night steering. The light comes softly, a slow rinsing of the darkness, and the sea responds by turning a sleepy shade of silver blue. The navigator sits cross-legged, sipping something from a carved gourd that smells faintly of fermented fruit and salt. He gestures for you to try it. You do. It tastes like regret, but politely. You nod as though it's delicious, good for courage, he says, smiling faintly. This morning's historical fact: ancient Polynesian navigators often relied on fermented breadfruit drinks during long voyages, not just for hydration, but also because mildly alcoholic brews preserved better than plain water. And yes, apparently, falling asleep mid-paddle was considered a minor occupational hazard. Your arms ache from holding the steering paddle all night, but there's no time to complain. The navigator has already shifted into lesson mode. Today, he says, you'll learn cloud reading. He points to a towering cumulus on the horizon, its flat top glowing faintly in the early light. That one, he says, no land nearby, too clean, too proud. Then he gestures farther west, where a faint smudge of thin, layered cloud barely clings to the horizon. That one, he says, means an island. You squint at what looks like absolutely nothing and nod solemnly, pretending to see it. Here's your obscure tidbit of the day. In certain parts of Polynesia, navigators memorized cloud diaries for every island within reach. Each had its own atmospheric, fingerprint-certain shapes and formations that consistently formed above specific locations. The idea was simple. Land may hide from you, but the clouds above it almost never do. Historians still debate whether these patterns were purely visual or also influenced by subtle thermal updrafts caused by islands themselves. Either way, there is something oddly comforting about the thought that nature whispers secrets if you be patient enough to listen. Meanwhile, you're distracted by the sound of soft splashing just beyond the canoe. A pod of dolphins arcs gracefully alongside, slipping through the water with effortless speed. The navigator doesn't even glance at them. They're telling us we're on the right path, he murmurs. Really, you ask, intrigued. He shrugs, or maybe they're just bored. You try to decide if this is wisdom or sarcasm. You conclude it's both. The canoe creaks softly as the wind freshens, pushing you farther into the open expanse. The navigator begins humming again, a slow, repetitive melody that matches the rhythm of the waves. You don't recognize the tune, but somehow it sounds older than language, as if it's been passed down through tides and generations alike. It's strangely hypnotic. Watching the sky and sea change in tandem, the rising sun turns the clouds gold, then pink, then a faint shade of lavender. The horizon feels infinite, but not empty. You can almost sense the invisible threads connecting islands, winds, and stars into one vast, breathing system. Keep watching the clouds, he reminds you. You nod, though your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment. If you fall asleep now, you'll probably drift into a small, quiet eternity. But for now, you stay awake trying to memorize. The colors of the sky, the smell of salt, and the soft curve of clouds that seem to hold all the answers you didn't know you were looking for. By midday, the sun hangs high and merciless, pressing down on you like a hand that won't let go. The canoe's wooden frame is warm against your legs, and the horizon seems to tremble slightly in the heat. The navigator has stripped his upper body bare, his skin glistening in the light, and gestures for you to do the same. Less cloth, less sweat, he says simply. You comply, mostly because your shirt has already achieved the consistency of a damp sponge. Your historical fact today: Polynesian voyaging canoes, called waka or wa depending on the region, were designed with meticulous precision. Dual-hulled for balance, lashed together without nails, and built entirely from natural materials. Some were capable of carrying 50 or more people across thousands of miles of open ocean. In other words, your canoe is the ancient equivalent of a cross-continental flight minus the legroom, snacks, or personal entertainment system. A faint breeze picks up from the east, and the navigator straightens, inhaling sharply. Wind shift, he says, then points toward a low, thick cloud formation gathering near the horizon. Rain, he adds with a slight frown. You glance at the nearly cloudless sky overhead, then back at him. Rain, he nods solemnly. By evening. Trust the signs. Here today's obscure tidbit. Polynesian navigators were so attuned to changes in humidity that some could detect approaching rain by smell alone apparently. Seawater carries a subtle difference in scent just before storms. You try to sniff the air discreetly, but all you get is salt and regret. As the afternoon drifts on, you notice the navigator's eyes keep darting upward. He points out high cirrus clouds racing westward, their thin strands stretched like pulled sugar. Upper winds, he says, faster than surface winds. They tell you where the storm begins. Historians still debate how much of this was trained observation versus innate sensitivity passed through generations. But standing here, watching his unbroken attention to the sky, you start to suspect it was both. The air grows heavier as the hours pass, and a subtle hush settles over the sea, as though even the waves are holding their breath. Birds disappear from sight. The dolphins that followed you earlier are gone, too. Storms are teachers, the navigator says finally. They remind you the sea is older than your plans. You want to ask if this is comforting or threatening, but his face gives nothing away. By late afternoon, a faint line of grey appears low on the western horizon. You blink, thinking it's your imagination, but no, the navigator nods slowly. There it is. Your hands tighten on the side of the canoe. The swell grows subtly taller, lifting you just enough to feel the shift in your stomach. The breeze cools, carrying the faint metallic scent of approaching rain. And then, far away, a single flash of lightning blooms behind the clouds. It's silent from this distance, just a brief white blossom on the horizon. The navigator smiles faintly, as though he's been waiting for this moment all day. "Don't worry," he says gently. "Tonight, the stars will return." You decide to believe him, mostly because believing otherwise feels exhausting. Night arrives like a slow exhale, long and deliberate, as if the entire ocean is sighing around you. The rain clouds linger far on the horizon, but above the canoe, the skies are clear and dense with stars once again. It feels like you've sailed into an entirely different world, one, where silence is more important than speech, and time has decided it no longer needs to keep track of itself. The navigator crouches low, adjusting the steering paddle, his body swaying gently with the rhythm of the canoe. Without looking up, he says, "Tonight, you'll learn how to read shadows in the sky." You raise an eyebrow at this. At night, you ask, skeptical. He doesn't respond, which is always his way of saying, "Yes, and you'll regret doubting me." Tonight's historical fact. Ancient Polynesian navigators used a technique called eteka, way of measuring progress, across vast distances by imagining stationary reference points. The idea wasn't to track where the canoe was, but rather where the world seemed to move beneath you. For example, you pick a distant star directly above an imagined island, and as you sail, you visualize that island shifting behind you while your canoe remains conceptually fixed. It's like reverse GPS, except you're the satellite and your entire map is made of starlight. He points to a cluster of faint, smudged stars just above the horizon. "That's the Southern Cross," he murmurs, tracing an invisible shape with his finger, and below it there's a gap. See it? You squint. You see a lot of darkness, which you suppose qualifies as a gap. That gap marks a path, he continues softly. It lines up with a chain of islands. He pauses, glances at you, and adds, "You probably won't make it through this lesson without falling asleep, but that's fine. The ocean forgives. One of your 3 subtle jokes has landed." He's right, you feel the heaviness in your eyelids. Here's today's obscure tidbit. Some navigators memorize the personalities of specific stars, assigning them traits like stubbornness or generosity, depending on how reliably they rose at predictable times. One star in particular, called Hikianalia, was considered playful because it frequently disappeared behind low clouds, basically the cosmic equivalent of a friend who ghosts you. Then texts back like nothing happened. Historians still debate whether these star personalities were just mnemonic devices or part of a broader spiritual worldview. Either way, there's something oddly comforting about believing the sky cares enough to have moods. A soft wind brushes past, bringing with it a faint floral scent. You glance around, confused there's no land in sight for hundreds of miles. The navigator notices your expression and chuckles softly. "Islands breathe," he says simply. "There, forests send their breath into the clouds. and the clouds bring it here. It sounds poetic, but also faintly impossible. You decide not to question it. You're too sleepy to risk a debate. You'll definitely lose. You lie back against a woven mat, letting the rocking of the canoe become a lullaby you didn't know you needed. The navigator continues humming under his breath. Tracing constellations you'll forget by morning, and above you the night opens endlessly, inviting you to dissolve into it, star by star. The next morning, the storm finally arrives, but not with the fury you expected. Instead, it drifts in quietly, like an uninvited guest who knows they relate and doesn't want to make a scene. The clouds roll low and heavy, flattening the horizon into a sheet of grey. Rain begins softly, a fine mist at first, before growing heavier, drumming against the stretched bark canopy overhead. You tilt your face up, expecting the navigator to panic, but instead, he seems perfectly calm. Storms, he says, are maps made of water. Today's historical fact: Polynesian navigators didn't just endure storms, they studied them. Shifting winds, sudden temperature drops, and the way rain fell differently on open ocean versus near islands. All of these became navigational cues. A sudden burst of squalls might indicate a reef nearby. A heavy, cool downpour could mean land was close enough to influence the weather. The canoe pitches gently as waves rise around you, not violently but persistently, like the ocean is testing your balance. You grip the hull tightly, though the navigator stands effortlessly, leaning into the swaying motion, as though he and the canoe share a private understanding. He points toward a distant patch of darker water. "See that?" he asks. You see nothing unusual. That's a shallow zone, he explains. The rain doesn't bounce the same there. It softens. You stare harder, but the only difference you notice is your growing nausea. Here es today es obscure tidbit. Some navigators train their hearing by sitting blindfolded near waterfalls for hours, learning to distinguish subtle differences in water sound. They claimed it helped them recognize shifting rainfall patterns at sea. You try closing your eyes now, focusing on the rhythm of the rain, but all you hear is wetness, so much wetness. Historians still debate whether these listening techniques were instinctive skills or carefully taught methods, but considering you can barely distinguish rain from louder rain, you're leaning toward instinct. By midday, the storm passes as gently as it arrived, leaving behind a calm, glassy ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. The navigator exhales slowly, as if releasing the last fragments of tension into the air. "Good," he says softly. "The sea has told us its mood." You wonder what exactly it said, but you suspect it's one of those mystical answers like "be patient" or "stop asking so many questions." A faint rainbow arcs low across the southern sky, its colors delicate and pale against the soft gray. You point it out, and for the first time today, the navigator smiles broadly. "Land breath," he says again. Closer now. You lean over the edge of the canoe, scanning the horizon until your vision blurs from the brightness. There's nothing there yet, but you believe him. Somehow, it feels impossible not to. The sea shifts under you like silk. The air smells faintly of wet leaves. And the canoe slides forward, as though it knows where to go without you. The following night drapes itself over the canoe like velvet soft, endless, and strangely intimate. The air is warm, the kind of sticky warmth that insists on staying no matter how many times you brush it away. And the ocean feels alive beneath you, breathing in long, slow rhythms. You lie back, your head against the woven mat, watching the stars tilt gently as the canoe sways. The navigator crouches nearby, sharpening a shell knife with quiet patience. He hasn't spoken in an hour, which somehow says more than words ever could. Finally, he breaks the silence. "You're still thinking about land," he says. You almost deny it, but he catches the hesitation and smiles faintly. "Land is loud," he explains. "It makes people restless. The ocean wants you empty." Today's historical fact: ancient Polynesian navigators often spent weeks or even months at sea, holding entire maps in memory rather than marking them physically. These mental maps weren't just distances between islands, they included star paths, seasonal wind changes, ocean swells, bird migrations, and even the personalities of clouds. Each piece formed a web of memory so intricate it could guide an entire society across thousands of miles. You watch him set the shell knife down, then point upward with his chin. "Tonight, we use the Pleiades." You follow his gesture to the tiny, shimmering cluster of stars. They look fragile, like someone spilled a handful of diamonds across black silk. "When the Pleiades rise before dawn," he murmurs, "it means planting season has come. And when they set at sunset, storms gather." You nod, pretending you understand, though you can't help thinking the stars seem perfectly indifferent about whether you plant taro or not. Here's today's obscure tidbit in certain island traditions. The Pleiades weren't just navigational tools, they were also linked to ancestral spirits. Families believed the stars were literally the campfires of their ancestors, burning in the sky to guide them home. One oral chant translates roughly to, "When you are lost, follow the smoke of their fire." Historians still debate whether this poetic imagery had spiritual or purely practical origins. You suspect the answer, as usual, is yes. The night deepens, and the wind cools slightly, carrying the faintest salt-sweet scent of something green and alive. You remember the navigator's words, "Islands breathe." You inhale deeply, trying to catch that breath before it slips past. The canoe rocks lazily, waves tapping gently against its sides. You're nearly asleep when the navigator says softly, "Listen to the water." You do. It takes a moment, but then you hear a subtle change in the ocean's voice. The swells here feel wider, slower, and deeper than they were last night. Different ground below us, he explains. Mountains under the sea. You open your mouth to ask how he can possibly hear underwater mountains. But he's already humming softly again, tracing constellations you'll forget by morning. The sound of water lapping against wood blends with his low voice, and somewhere above, the ancestors' campfires flicker on, bright and eternal. You drift closer to sleep, wondering what it feels like to hold a whole ocean in your head and never lose your way. Morning greets you not with sunlight, but with birdsong. At first, it's faint, just a few chirps carried on the breeze. But soon, the air hums with wings and calls you don't recognize. The navigator doesn't look up. He already knows what it means. Land is close, he says simply, pulling at the steering paddle to adjust your course. Today's historical fact: Polynesian navigators studied the behavior of seabirds to locate islands long before land was visible. Certain species, like the Manu-o-K white tern, only fly a fixed distance from shore before returning. By tracking their direction at dawn and dusk, navigators could triangulate an island's position without ever seeing it. The navigator gestures toward the horizon, where a single white tern arcs against the pale sky. She sleeps on trees, not water, he explains softly. Follow her home. You squint after the tiny shape until it vanishes. But the knowledge lingers anyway. Land is somewhere ahead, hiding just beyond sight. Here's today's obscure tidbit. Some navigators memorized the flight personalities of specific bird species, how fast they glided, how sharply they turned, and how early they left at first light. The noddy tern, for example, was considered lazy because it returned to land much earlier than its counterparts. Imagine memorizing the equivalent of hundreds of bird LinkedIn profiles. Also, you don't accidentally sail into eternity. Historians still debate how much of this knowledge was standardized across the Pacific and how much varied from island to island. The uncertainty makes sense, though this wasn't a written science. Every master navigator was also, in a way, an artist. By midday, the sky turns a blinding shade of blue, so wide it feels almost aggressive. The canoe glides forward, the ocean beneath it shifting from deep indigo to a softer, shallower turquoise. The navigator dips his hand into the water, lets it run between his fingers, and says, "Sand below us now." You look down, baffled, but he shakes his head before you ask. The sea tells you, if you listen. For the first time since you set out, the air smells faintly of soil warm, damp, and alive. You close your eyes and imagine palms swaying on unseen shores, humid forests breathing out clouds, and the sound of waves breaking on beaches still invisible to you. As the sun slides lower, the birds grow bolder, swooping close to the canoe as though scouting your arrival. A school of small silverfish darts just beneath the surface, catching sunlight like shattered glass. The navigator smiles faintly, the first real smile you've seen today. "Tomorrow," he says, "tomorrow we touch the sand." You lean against the hull, letting exhaustion fold over you like a blanket. The ocean rocks you into something between waking and dreaming and far above. The ancestors' campfires burn steadily on, whispering you closer to where the map finally ends. Dawn creeps in softly this time, with a thin watercolor wash of pinks and pale oranges smudging the horizon. The canoe rocks less now, as though the ocean has decided to be merciful for a while. You blink, yourself awake, rubbing salt crust from your lashes. The navigator stands at the front, barefoot and still as a statue. He shields his eyes, squinting to the east, lost in thought. Finally, he lets out a breath and says, "Clouds." You follow his gaze, expecting something dramatic, towering thunderheads, maybe, or swirling storms. But all you see are soft, lazy streaks on the far horizon, not worth the fuss, really. They hover over the islands, he says, still watching. Clouds change when land pushes up beneath them. Today's historical fact: Polynesian navigators used cloud formations to locate islands, often from distances of more than 30 miles. Rising warm air from forests and mountains forced clouds into distinctive shapes and patterns, especially in the late afternoon. Some even recognized individual islands based on their cloud signatures, as if each one signed its name in the sky. The navigator gestures to a cloud that looks like a bowl turned upside down. "That one drinks from the trees," he says, "like clouds are cups and forests are sipping." You nod along, acting like you get it, but inside, you're thinking this is just like Sherlock Holmes spotting a clue in the ocean. And deducing someone else's shoe size, childhood trauma, and lunch preferences. Here's today's obscure tidbit. Oral histories mention something called cloud stepping, where navigators would mark imaginary points in the sky based on shifting cloud stacks. They de-walk mentally from one to another as if climbing an invisible staircase toward land. Scholars debate whether this was a literal technique or more poetic metaphor, but it certainly sounds like a beautiful way to measure distance climbing the sky, one soft step at a time. As the sun rises higher, the clouds swell thicker, denser, almost theatrical. The navigator crouches next to you, drawing a quick map in the wet wood. Big island, he says, sketching a curve with risky reefs here. You glance over the edge of the canoe, suddenly convinced danger lurks just beneath the glassy turquoise water. By midday, the canoe slips into shallower seas, and the sunlight strikes the ocean floor with such clarity that it looks unreal patches of golden sand. Broken coral and darker, shadow drops where the depths still hide secrets. Small fish flit below, blinking silver with every turn. The navigator hums, signaling land is near. It's not really a prayer or a song. It's something ancient. By late afternoon, your first glimpse of land arrives not palm trees or beaches, but a jagged green silhouette rising faintly against the sky, almost blending with the clouds that first revealed it. You feel a quiet thrill beneath your ribs, though you pretend you're calm and collected. The navigator sees your face and laughs a little. Watch out, he warns. Islands make more noise than the ocean. With that mysterious warning, he steers the canoe, humming softly as it moves ahead into a future filled with hints of salt, earth, and things yet to be discovered. The sun slides toward the horizon, painting the waves with molten gold, and the air thickens with a sense of arrival you can almost taste. The island grows larger now, its slopes velvet green against the fading sky. The navigator leans over the side, trailing his fingers in the water as though greeting an old friend. Feel that? He asks. You don't, but you nod anyway, assuming this is one of those you had to be born into it moments. Fresh water, mixing, he explains. Streams flow from the mountains, pushing the salt away. We're close. Today's historical fact. Some navigators determined land proximity by tasting subtle changes in water salinity. Near islands, fresh water from rivers and springs creates faint shifts in flavor. Density, and even temperature signs almost invisible to the untrained eye, but obvious to someone who has spent their life reading oceans like open books. You try dipping your fingers in the water and giving it the tiniest, most reluctant sip. Predictably, it tastes like salt. He laughs softly at your grimace, but doesn't explain further. Here's today's obscure tidbit on certain voyages. Navigators trained apprentices by blindfolding them, spinning them in circles, and setting them down in canoes on open water. The challenge. Tell north from south without moving, using only the feel of swells and wind. Some succeeded, others. Well, they became farmers. Historians still debate whether this training was widespread or reserved for the most elite apprentices. Personally, you suspect this might have been a clever way for old navigators to entertain themselves on long trips. As dusk deepens, the canoe slips into calmer, waters shielded by reefs. The navigator adjusts the sail, his movements fluid and unhurried, as though he's rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. You notice the sky thickening, with smoke-gray clouds, not storm clouds, but the kind born from cooking fires. Somewhere ahead, someone's preparing food you can't yet see, and the scent of roasted fish and taro rides faintly on the air, taunting your empty stomach. The navigator notices your nose twitch and smiles. "First rule when you land," he says, "never eat like a stranger. Eat like family, or the island rejects you." The shoreline appears at last, a pale strip of sand, catching the final light, fringed with palms that sway like lazy sentinels. Shadows stretch long across the beach, and somewhere inland, a single drumbeat echoes faintly, slow and steady as a heartbeat. The navigator pulls the canoe to rest in the shallow surf and steps into the water, his feet sinking into cool sand. You follow, awkwardly, nearly tripping on a submerged rock you reassure he knew was there, but didn't he warn you about. "Tomorrow," he says, gazing inland, "you'll see how they live." He doesn't elaborate, but you notice his expression soften as he stares into the dense forest beyond the shore, where unseen paths wind upward toward cloud-hidden peaks. The night air carries the scent of flowers and earth, layered and deep, and as you stand there ankle-deep in warm surf, you realize this is only the first island. The ocean still holds more secrets than you've begun to understand. The navigator lays his hand flat against the hull of the canoe, whispering something you don't catch. Gratitude, maybe, or farewell. Then he says, softly but firmly, "Sleep now. Tomorrow is louder." Morning comes slow, slipping through the canopy in fractured beams of gold. You wake on a mat of woven pandanus, the air thick with earth and flowers, the distant sound of waves reminding you that the sea is always waiting. The navigator is already awake, of course. He is sitting cross-legged, with a calm expression that suggests he hasn't slept at all. "Island days," he murmurs, almost to himself, move differently than sea days. You stretch, joints cracking, trying to ignore the fact that your back feels like you slept on a politely padded rock. Still, the air smells better than salt and damp wood. Somewhere close, someone is roasting breadfruit and the sweet. Nutty scent curls lazily around your senses like an invitation. Here's today's major fact. Polynesian island communities practiced intricate land stewardship systems, often dividing resources by watershed. This meant people living near the shore and those in the mountains had reciprocal responsibilities, trading fish for crops in a cycle that kept everyone balanced. It wasn't just economics, it was cosmology. The land was a body, and each group was an organ keeping it alive. You follow the navigator inland along a winding path. The ground squishes beneath your bare feet, damp from last night's rain. Above, birds chatter noisily in the canopy, like gossiping neighbors who have nothing better to do. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some villagers trained birds, particularly frigates, to act as living fishing guides. They'd tie a thin cord to the bird's leg, release it, and watch where it flew. Frigates can spot schools of fish from impossible distances. The bird would dive, tug the line, and dinner. Historians still debate how widespread this practice actually was. Was it standard? Was it ceremonial? Or was it, as you secretly hope, just one-board villagers? Why not? Experiment that worked too well to abandon. You arrive at a clearing where families are tending taro patches. The navigator greets them with the kind of easy familiarity you'll never manage, no matter how many times you nod politely. They laugh, share food, and gesture for you to sit. You do, sinking into soft grass while a bowl of poi is set in front of you. The texture is sticky, the flavor mild, but you're too hungry to complain. The navigator glances at you sideways and says, "See." Not rejected yet. The village hums around you with the rhythms of daily life, children weaving baskets, elders carving bowls, dogs snoozing in the shade. It's all so ordinary, and yet, somehow, extraordinary because it's still here, beating steadily like a hidden heart in the middle of the sea. You lean back, eyes drifting toward the clouds overhead. They're moving slowly, lazily, as if they too have surrendered to the pace of island days. And maybe you have, too. Afternoon brings heat heavy enough to press your eyelids closed. The island is alive with cicadas droning, leaves rustling, waves murmuring in the distance. Everything feels like it's swaying. The navigator beckons you again, this time leading you toward higher ground. Easier to see, he says. Clouds tell more when you look down. You trudge behind him, half sweating, half dozing, climbing through a tangle of tree roots and volcanic rock. The path is less a trail and more an excuse for one, but eventually. The forest opens to a ridge overlooking the vast, rolling Pacific. The sight nearly knocks the air from your lungs. The ocean stretches so far you almost forget there's more than one color of blue in the world. The navigator squats, resting his chin on one hand, and points to a cloud stack far on the horizon. Different today. Tall means island, but farther than we want. Here's today's major fact. Navigators didn't just use clouds to find islands, they used them to avoid them too. On voyages meant to connect distant points, stopping at the wrong island could mean war, famine, or just running out of supplies. Knowing when to not land was as crucial as knowing when to approach. And here is today's obscure tidbit. Some oral traditions speak of navigators, identifying islands by the color of reflected clouds. Sandy atolls, volcanic peaks, and dense forests each changed the underbelly hue of the sky. A skilled navigator could read an island's geology without ever stepping foot on it, which, if true, is basically the ancient equivalent of browsing real estate listings from space. Historians still debate how reliable these reflections were. Did every navigator really see the same shades? Or was it a poetic exaggeration passed through generations? No one can say for certain. The navigator throws you a glance, not for you yet. Takes years. You sigh, pretending not to care, but part of you aches to see what he sees. By evening, you descend back into the village. Fires flicker, drums pulse faintly, and people begin, the kind of slow, winding songs that sound less like music and more like memory being kept alive. The navigator doesn't join them. He sits by the canoe, tracing circles on the hull as though coaxing it to remember the next journey. Tomorrow, he says quietly, you'll learn how stars argue. You chuckle, assuming he's being poetic again, but he doesn't smile. The firelight dances across his face, and for a moment, you realize that every line, every gesture, every silence is part of a map, far older than paper. You lie back on the sand, letting the drums and the surf blend into a lullaby, and you wonder whether tomorrow's sky will argue with you too or lull you into another patient surrender. Night has a way of pulling you into itself out here. There's no city glow, no power lines humming faintly in the distance, no headlights sweeping across your ceiling. There's just blackness above, so complete and unbroken that it almost feels like you've stepped into the inside of a whale. The navigator calls it Teirangi, the sky as sea, and he's already watching it with narrowed eyes as though it's speaking to him. You sit cross-legged on the damp sand, pulling your knees close to your chest. The air is cooler now, the ocean breathing gently behind you. Somewhere nearby, someone is still singing, but their voice fades as you focus on the silence between waves. The navigator clears his throat softly, his hands tracing invisible lines in the air. Stars tonight, arguing, he says. See there, twins pulling apart. You follow his gesture and, after an embarrassing amount of squinting, spot two faint stars low on the horizon. Arguing, you ask. He smiles without looking at you. One says land east, other says west. You listen to both, then choose. Here's today's major fact. Polynesian navigators used star paths, memorizing where specific stars rose and set on the horizon at different times of the year. The navigator might track dozens at once, like living compasses stitched across the night. But here's your obscure tidbit. Some chants, passed down through families of navigators, describe star families who behave differently depending on their mood. Certain stars compete, pulling a navigator's attention in opposite directions, while others cooperate, reinforcing each other's guidance. It's hard to tell where poetry ends and technique begins, which may be the point. Historians still debate whether these chants encode strict astronomical data or simply mnemonic devices. Are they literal, symbolic, or, in some cosmic joke, both? You tilt your head back, letting your eyes adjust until the entire vault of the sky opens. The Milky Way stretches like a white scar, and for a moment, you understand why navigators describe the heavens as a river eternal, winding and constant even when the sea below turns wild. The navigator leans closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. You want calm voyage. You listen to stars like gossip. They never lie. But they don't always tell full truth, either. You almost laugh, but something about the seriousness in his tone stops you. Farther down the beach, a group gathers around a fire, their silhouettes dancing as sparks drift upward. The smell of roasted fish drifts on the breeze. You realize you're starving, but you stay rooted here, unwilling to look away from the slow, deliberate conversation unfolding between sky and sea. The navigator finally exhales deep and long. Tomorrow, he says, we test you. The words settle like weight on your shoulders. You're not sure if you're ready, but then again, neither were the stars when they started arguing. Dawn comes pale and quiet, as though even the island isn't ready to be awake. The horizon blushes faintly, and somewhere in the forest, a single bird makes the mistake of singing too early. You rise reluctantly, your limbs heavy, the sand clinging stubbornly to your skin. The navigator greets you with a nod and no words, handing you a half-woven garland of leaves. It's not decorative. You realize it's practical. The leaves will keep you cool as you work. Today, he says, you build your mind canoe. This sounds metaphorical at first, and you almost relax until he starts arranging stones on the beach, creating a strange constellation on the sand. Here is today's major fact. Traditional navigators trained apprentices by building stick charts on land physical models of ocean swells, waned patterns, and island chains made from palm ribs and shells. The apprentices didn't simply memorize them. They absorbed them until the sea's rhythms lived inside their bodies. But here's your obscure tidbit. Some of these charts weren't meant to be read during voyages at all. They were teaching tools, burned or dismantled after lessons, because the real map was the navigator himself. It's unsettling to think of an entire geography existing in memory alone, like a library constantly rewritten in bone and breath. Historians still debate whether every island group used charts in the same way, or if some relied entirely on oral transmission. It's possible, some argue, that entire schools of navigation vanished without leaving a single artifact behind. The navigator gestures for you to sit. He places a smooth stone in your palm. Island, he says simply. Then, using thin sticks, he lays out the swell patterns radiating toward and away from it. You feel waves, he continues, but you see them too, eyes closed, boat moving, body listening. You nod solemnly, trying not to look like you're pretending to understand. Good, he says anyway, clearly unconvinced. By midday, the sun is relentless. Sweat runs down your back, and the garland has wilted into something closer to boiled salad. You want to complain, but then you notice the navigator hasn't moved in hours. Tracing and retracing the same chart, his mind somewhere between Earth and horizon. Finally, he looks up. You try tonight, he says. Try. What? You ask warily. He just smiles. Finding us. The words hang there, sharp as fishhooks. Tonight, apparently, the stars will argue again, and this time, you're expected to answer. The evening comes warm and windless, the kind of night where sound seems to travel farther than it should. You're barefoot on the sand, your pulse loud in your ears. The ocean looks harmless right now, a flat sheet of dark glass stretching toward nothingness. The navigator squats by the canoe, inspecting the lashings with quiet precision. He hasn't said much all day, just watched you fumble through mock exercises, occasionally sighing as though reconsidering his life choices. You're ready, he says at last. It sounds less like confidence and more like a polite lie. You step into the canoe, trying to look graceful, and instead making a small splash that earns you an unimpressed side eye. The navigator sits at the stern, pushing you gently off the beach. The canoe slides forward, gliding over water that feels almost weightless. Tonight's major historical fact: Polynesian navigators could determine their latitude by the height of specific stars above the horizon. They didn't measure angles with tools. They memorized them, using the width of their own fingers held at arm's length as a living sextant. Obscure tidbit for you. One particular chant describes how to measure the drunken shark's tail, a poetic name for the erratic apparent movement of a key star near the horizon. If the tail trembled above a certain palm width, you were drifting too far south. If below, too far north. It's not in any formal manual because, well, there wasn't a formal manual. The manuals were breathing and impatient and sitting behind you, muttering, "Don't capsize." Historians still debate whether every community used the same star measurement system, or if each family developed its own unique finger libraries. If true, It means know to navigators read the heavens quite the same way a personalized, celestial dialect passed down in blood and bone. The canoe rocks gently as you adjust your balance. The navigator points to the horizon where the first stars have appeared, their reflections trembling faintly on the water. You know, this one, he says, tracing a path with his finger. You stare blankly at the sky, instantly betraying that you do not know this one. That's okay, he adds, sighing. Stars wait longer than people. Somewhere behind you, the island fades into silhouette, its dark spine dissolving into the greater darkness around it. A flock of seabirds arcs overhead, briefly visible before vanishing into the void. The navigator watches them closely, lips moving as he counts something under his breath. Birds leaving early, he murmurs, means crosswind coming. You nod as though this is obvious. For a moment, silence swallows the canoe. Only the gentle slapping of small waves against the hull remains, hypnotic and endless. You breathe deeper, slower. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize this entire system stars, swells, birds, clouds is one interlaced song. And you're just now hearing the first few notes. The navigator taps your shoulder. Your turn, he says softly. You look up at the infinite sky, the arguing stars, the restless sea, and try not to panic. The canoe drifts in silence while you pretend to know what you're doing. The navigator sits behind you like a patient but deeply skeptical schoolteacher. First, he whispers, "Close your eyes." You hesitate. Shouldn't I be looking at the stars? He shakes his head. Eyes later, body first. So you shut them. And then you feel it. The ocean beneath the canoe, breathing its own long rhythm. There's a steady rise and fall, like someone rolling in their sleep beneath you. But then there's something subtler, a sideways tug, almost hidden under the larger motion. The navigator hums approvingly. Good, he says quietly. That's cross swell. You don't see it, but you feel it. North of us, long wind. South, different. Two voices. You listen both. Tonight's major fact. Polynesian navigators identified multiple overlapping swells and could distinguish their directions. Even in darkness. One swell might be born hundreds of miles away, invisible to the eye but detectable to anyone who'd trained their balance. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some oral traditions describe ocean swells as personalities, each with its own temper. One chant refers to the angry Uncle Swell coming from the southeast, that always argues with the sleepy brother Swell from the west. If you understood these characters, you could converse with them, letting their feuds guide your path without looking at a single star. Historians still debate whether this personification helped navigators memorize patterns, or whether it represented a deeper cultural philosophy that the sea itself was alive, its voices deserving respect rather than measurement alone. You open your eyes, glancing toward the horizon. A faint, low cloud formation drapes itself like a veil over the dark line of the sea. See there, the navigator says, pointing. Clouds hold shape above land. You find them before sun. You squint, trying to distinguish the subtle difference between these clouds and the hundreds of others above you. To your untrained eyes, they all look like varying shades of white and fluffy. But you nod anyway, adding another entry to your growing library of polite lies. By now, the night sky has fully bloomed, a dome of cold diamonds turning slowly overhead. You recognize exactly 0 constellations, but feel strangely calm. The navigator dips a hand into the sea, letting the water stream through his fingers. Warm, he mutters, then taps the side of the canoe twice. Means current pushing west faster tonight. You're amazed and mildly annoyed that someone can casually extract climate data from touching seawater. While you barely manage to stay upright, hours pass in a slow, timeless drift. You lose track of where the island is, where you're headed, even where here is. The canoe rocks, the swells murmur, the stars rearrange themselves quietly above. The navigator finally speaks, low and deliberate. Tonight, you begin to see, not with eyes, with whole self. You exhale slowly, realizing this is less about finding land and more about surrendering to patterns you can T-force into clarity. Somewhere out there, the ocean whispers secrets. Tonight, you catch the faintest syllables. The night deepens, yet somehow it feels brighter than before. The stars, no longer just a backdrop, begin to pulse with meaning. You sit cross-legged in the canoe, trying to imitate the navigator's posture, shoulders relaxed, spine straight, as if balance comes from dignity. Look there, he murmurs, pointing to the faint belt of 3 stars just above the horizon. That Wante Punga, the anchor. The name rolls easily, soft and deliberate. Te Punga. You whisper it under your breath like a secret password, half expecting the ocean to approve and part open like a door. Tonight's major fact. Te Punga, part of the constellation you know as Orion, served as one of the key reference stars for Polynesian navigators. By following its seasonal rise and set, sailors could chart their drift across the Pacific with astonishing precision. And your obscure tidbit, there are chants that treat Te Punga as a literal anchor, imagining the canoe tied by invisible rope to this star. If you kept it steady on the horizon for hours, you were moored to it, as though the heavens had lent you a tether. Some navigators even whispered apologies when they let it slip, as if they'd dishonored a patient friend. Historians still debate whether every island group used Te Punga the same way, or if its meaning changed depending on which legends tied it to their ancestors. For some, it's an anchor. For others, it's a spear. For one small atoll you'll never pronounce correctly, it's called the Sleeping Manta. Everyone swore their version was the correct one, proving that ancient people also enjoyed arguing over names. The canoe continues to glide, carving a quiet trail over unseen depths. The stars overhead seem impossibly still, but you begin to notice the slow, deliberate spinning of the sky. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but the navigator tilts his head slightly, as though hearing the creak of cosmic gears. You watch long enough, he says softly, and stars stop being far. They come closer. You nod like you understand, though privately you still marveling that the entire navigation system doesn't collapse every time a cloud wanders across the wrong part of the sky. And speaking of clouds, a formation low on the horizon catches your eye. Strange. Flat-bottomed, mass glowing faintly against the night. Land cloud, the navigator says simply, as if that explains everything. Land cloud, you repeat, pretending it's perfectly reasonable for clouds to have nationalities. Water rises from trees, he explains patiently, makes its own roof. You file that fact away, equal parts impressed and suspicious. The canoe rocks slightly, the the swells changing shape beneath you, and the navigator shifts to keep balance without ever glancing down. You mimic him, poorly. A small fish leaps briefly beside the canoe, its silver body flashing like a falling star before vanishing. The navigator watches it, nodding slightly. "Fish hunt on this path," he whispers. "Means we're still good." You wonder if he also consults crabs, turtles, and mildly opinionated plankton. But for the first time tonight, something clicks. The fish, the cloud, the stars, the swells, all these scattered signals are connected, pieces of a single code. You're not fluent yet, but you're starting to sound out letters. Somewhere in the dark, the ocean breathes again, long and slow. The air grows cooler, the salt damp against your skin, and the ocean carries a different voice now. It's deeper, more resonant, as if you've crossed into a quieter, more serious conversation. The navigator shifts, dipping his paddle gently into the black water. "Listen," he whispers. You strain your ears and hear nothing at first, only the soft splash of paddle against wave. But then it arrives, a faint hissing, like sand poured onto stone. "Reef," he says, far, but close enough to hear. Tonight's major fact: reefs were used as sound markers by Polynesian navigators. The way waves broke over them, miles away and out of sight, created distinct acoustic signatures that trained sailors could identify in the darkness. Imagine navigating the world's largest ocean by listening. Your obscure tidbit: some stories say certain reefs sang specific songs. Not metaphorically, navigators described their sounds in rhythmic syllables, mimicking them in chants to memorize the roots. There's even one ancient tale of a reef called Taimama, whose song supposedly changed after a volcanic eruption, forcing sailors to relearn its voice entirely. Historians still debate whether these chants were purely mnemonic devices or whether sailors genuinely perceived reefs as singing entities. You lean toward the latter because, frankly, the ocean feels alive enough to have opinions. The canoe drifts, and the navigator gestures toward a streak of faint phosphorescence on the surface. Tiny plankton spark and shimmer under the hull, sketching constellations in reverse beneath your feet. For a fleeting second, the stars above and the stars below mirror each other perfectly. "Skies inside water," the navigator says softly. "Waters inside sky." You're about to comment on how poetic that sounds, but he's already moved on, tapping the side of the canoe twice. "Swells change," he mutters. "Listen with your knees." This is confusing, but you try anyway, closing your eyes and letting your body become an antenna. Sure enough, there it is, a deeper undercurrent pulling diagonally beneath the canoe, nudging you ever so slightly westward. The navigator gives you the faintest nod of approval. Good. Ocean talks. Most people sleep too loud to hear. As he speaks, a faint scent of earth drifts toward you, rich, damp, and unmistakable. You glance up, searching the horizon for land, but there's nothing visible yet. The navigator doesn't bother looking. He already knows. You sit back, letting the stars and the waves and the secret smell of unseen islands weave around you. The air grows heavier with meaning, and for the first time all night, you stop thinking about getting it right. You just listen. Somewhere, far off, a bird calls once and vanishes into silence. Dawn begins as a whisper, not an announcement. The horizon, barely visible, glows with the faintest ribbon of silver, stretching like a thread between sea and sky. You breathe it in slowly, the air shifting cooler with each passing moment. The navigator hasn't spoken in a while. His silence is deliberate, as though words might disturb the balance of what's about to happen. A soft ripple breaks against the hull, and you realize the swells have come flattened, almost like silk brushed smooth by invisible hands. The stars begin to fade, not because they've gone, but because the sky is slowly deciding on a brighter palette. Almost there, the navigator murmurs, though you still see nothing but endless ocean. Tonight's major fact: Polynesian navigators often detected land long before seeing it not by sight, but by a combination of birds, cloud patterns, swells, and subtle temperature shifts in the air. Some islands, like Puka Puka and Manihiki, could be found from over 30 nautical miles away without a single landmark breaking the horizon. Your obscure tidbit: certain migratory birds, like the noddy tern, were trained unintentionally as navigational assistants. At dawn, they'd fly straight out to sea to fish, but always return to land before sunset. Navigators tracked their patterns, sometimes even resting until flocks passed overhead before adjusting course. There is an old chant from Tokelau describing these birds as little messengers in black cloaks, which somehow feels both elegant and slightly dramatic. Historians still debate how consistent this bird-based system really was. Some argue navigators exaggerated their precision to enhance prestige, while others believe their skill was understated so effortless it seemed magical. Standing here, in this fragile balance of stars and salt and silence, you suspect magic and skill were never separate. The navigator points toward a low, flat-topped cloud on the horizon, faint and pale in the breaking light. There, he says. Island breath. You squint. It looks like a cloud, just a cloud. But he nods once, confident. Land, hidden beneath the curve of the earth, is exhaling moisture so steadily that it sculpts this particular shape, distinct from any other cloud formation. You realize, almost unwillingly, that he's been right about everything else so far. So you simply nod back, pretending you saw it before he pointed. The canoe moves faster now, as if it, too, smells the nearness of rest. The water glimmers in soft bands, and faint streaks of gold crawl across the surface like gentle brushstrokes. Birds begin to appear one by one, darting low and sharp over the waves. Somewhere, in the distance, something green flickers faintly, like a secret being whispered just for you. The island emerges slowly, as though it's shy. First, a thin line of green fractures the horizon, trembling like a mirage. Then it grows trees rising, beaches softening into shape, shadows folding over ridges. It feels unreal, as if someone quietly painted it while you weren't looking. You can finally hear the sound of breakers against a distant reef, soft and muffled like footsteps on wet sand. The navigator exhales deeply, shoulders loosening for the first time tonight. Good journey, he says, and somehow it carries more weight than the words deserve. Tonight's major fact: many Polynesian islands were settled after voyages lasting thousands of miles. Yet modern research shows navigators could consistently locate specific chains without error, generation after generation. Even modern GPS studies suggest their traditional methods had accuracy margins within a handful of miles. Staggering feat when you consider the ocean has no street signs. Your obscure tidbit. Some islands created songs about neighboring islands they'd never visited, encoding distances and directions into poetry. A navigator could sing his way across the Pacific, each verse representing a new star path or swell pattern. One chant describing the Marquesas took 7 hours to perform start to finish, which sounds exhausting unless you really love geography, or have nowhere better to be than, well, the ocean. Historians still debate whether these chants evolved from ritual storytelling, or whether they began strictly as technical memory tools. Maybe both, maybe neither. And somehow you realize the uncertainty is the point. The canoe skims over one last gentle swell, and suddenly the island feels near enough to touch. The air changes warmer, sweeter, carrying hints of flowers and damp soil. The promise of shade beneath palms that look impossibly soft after endless water. The navigator pulls the paddle in, letting the canoe drift lazily. He rests his hand on the hull as if thanking it, then closes his eyes briefly, listening. You follow his lead. The breakers sigh, birds call somewhere unseen, and the swell rocks you softly, rhythmically, endlessly. It's here, in this slow arriving, that time finally folds. The stars you memorized, the swells you felt in your knees. The clouds you doubted all of it carried you here, seamlessly, quietly, without rush. You realize now you were never really watching the ocean. It was watching you, all along. The island waits patiently, but there's no need to hurry. The canoe drifts in the shallows, rocking with the faintest, most forgiving rhythm. The air is warm, soft on your skin, heavy with salt and the quiet sweetness of flowers you haven't seen yet, but already believe in. Breathe slowly, deeply. Inhale the hush of the reef as waves break far off, their sound low and steady like the world breathing beneath you. Exhale the weight of distance, of wandering, of the endless sky and its 1,000 silent signals. You've crossed the ocean without needing to understand all its secrets. That's okay. That's how the ocean prefers it. Above you, the clouds curl and drift like brushstrokes on glass, changing shape with a patience only centuries can teach. Somewhere behind you, the stars still burn, though you no longer need their names. The canoe creaks softly. Water laps against its sides. A bird cries once, faint and short, then quiets. Everything you need to know, you already know. The stars taught you where to go. The swells guided your balance. The birds whispered when to trust the sky, and the clouds, stubborn and silent, held the last secret, the promise of land long before it ever appeared. Your eyes grow heavy. Let the sound of the breakers carry you. Let the hush of the canoe fold around you. The ocean will hold your weight without question, as it always has, as it always will. The island isn't going anywhere. Neither are you. Rest now. Drift, slowly, like the canoe rocking on its quiet path.